Hi, and welcome to Real Angel Chronicles. My guest today is Amy Rose. She is a therapist, she's an author, a spiritual mentor, and I'm really excited to have her here today because we are going to be talking about how to receive angel signs, signs from the universe, especially during dark times in our life, how to stay connected. Amy, maybe you could just start by talking about your experience as a social worker and the special relationship you had with one of your clients. And we can just dive in right there.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me, Jen. This is my favorite topic in the world, so it's a really fun thing to do. And I think it's so important. There's so much stress and fear, and so many people are having a kind of dark time right now or thinking we're living in dark times, that we need inspiration, we need hope, we need to know there's a force of love and goodness available that can inspire us. So when I was a social worker, gosh, this is many years ago, like the mid 90s. And I was a social worker in a nursing home, and it was a really awful place. I'm sad to say. I lived outside New Orleans at the time, and there was lots of neglect, and it was not a good place for a lot of our elders. And I met one of these residents, and her name was Dora Katz, and she was this feisty, funny, sparkly woman, and she was 90 when I met her. And she had an amazing life. Dora she was born in 1902, and she was an amazing athlete. So think about that. Growing up in 1902, she played tennis, softball, she swam, and she was this amazing runner, and she loved to hurdle. And so she kind of hurdled through life. Obstacles that were in front of her, she knew how to hurdle over them. She lived through World War I, World War II. And she missed Babe Didrikson's world record for hurdling by 1/5 of a second. So she was this amazing athlete who was born in a time where women were not respected for that. So she was very funny, and she had a great attitude, and she would make up a little rhyme or a little quip when she would meet you, or she'd hear a funny name, and she liked to kind of just spoof and be goofy. And so the first day I met her, she saw me talking to my boss, who I guess we were having what she thought was a serious conversation. And when I met her, and she said, "Who's that fellow over there?" And I said, "Oh, that's the boss. His name is Mr. Pitts." And she said, "Mr. Pitts is having fits." And I just thought that was so funny, and I just laughed. And so I would observe her doing that. And we became really good friends and really close. And every night when I would go home, I'd lean my head in her room and I'd say, "Good night, Dora. I'm going home now." And she'd say, "Ladybug, ladybug, fly away home." And I would just laugh. It was like our little evening routine. And over the year that I worked there, I realized that she had outlived most of her friends and her siblings, her spouse. So I contacted one of her distant nieces, and when I left, I asked if we could move her to a better home that was near me and that I could check on her. And so over the years, she became like my adopted grandmother. I was like her adopted granddaughter. And so we had this little routine, and whenever I would leave, I would say, "Okay, I'm going home." And she'd say, "Ladybug, ladybug, fly away home." Well, when she was 98, she began to decline. And I was heartbroken because she was such a source of love and inspiration to me. And she really taught me how to hurdle through life. Like, she demonstrated when life gets hard, you jump. You go over what's in front of you. You can't sit around and feel sorry for yourself. And
Yeah.
she had someone who demonstrated that her whole life. So, at the end, I was able to be with her. We were kind of around the clock, her final days. And it was the middle of the night, like 3 a.m., when she left this world. And I was heartbroken. I knew that it was time, and I certainly didn't want her to stay in her old body that, she was in a wheelchair where she had once been this incredible athlete. But, you have the parts of you that understand, and then you have the parts of you that grieve when you love someone. So by that time, I lived a little bit farther away, and we drove home, and My boyfriend sort of was trying to comfort me, and I just didn't want to go back home to our house. I just felt, ugh, I just couldn't stand the thought to go back. I wasn't ready, knowing I'd never see Dora again. So Jeff said to me, let's go to the beach. We lived in a little coastal town, and the sun was rising. It was still early in the morning. So we went to the beach, and we were walking along, your feet in the water, just kind of feeling the sun. And all of a sudden, I felt something kind of like on my neck. And I looked down, and my entire body, like from here to my waist, was covered in ladybugs. And I was like, oh my God. And I looked over at Jeff, who was 1 inch from me. He did not have a single ladybug on him. And I looked at each other and we're like, it's Dora. She's saying to me, I've flown home, And oh, it was such a beautiful moment for me because I really felt like she was saying, like, I flew home and now it's your time to fly. Go live your life. Because she would always say that to me. Go live your life, honey. Go live your life. And over the years, when I've had some kind of angst or difficult times, sometimes a ladybug will come to me and land on me in a weird time when it's like not where ladybugs show up or the time of year. And she
Mhm.
died on Valentine's Day, which I always thought was such a beautiful thing about love. So I sort of correlate Valentine's Day and ladybugs and Dora together.
Mhm.
So that's one of my experiences where I felt a real message and sign that was letting me know she had been free and she was still with me and I wasn't alone and she could still touch my life. Yeah.
I love that story because that is, to me, an undeniable sign. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, I literally had hundreds of ladybugs on my shirt. And,
Yeah, and to have your boyfriend there with you to validate it as
yeah.
well.
And he didn't have
Yeah,
one. He was like, all right,
yeah.
Dora, I could have one on me. Yeah, but it was just she just covered me and it was such a beautiful moment too because the sun was shining and that it was just sort of magical in the middle of
Yeah,
deep sadness. Yeah. And
yeah.
that was really the beginning of many experiences I had where either a synchronicity came to me or a external sign that was irrefutable to sort of give me confirmation or to comfort me. Sometimes I would get like a message and it really helped me see what is a deep belief I now hold that we're never alone. We're always guided. Love is around us. And that part of us is eternal. Like we stay connected. Yeah.
Can I ask you where you were in terms of religion or spirituality at the time? Did
Yeah.
you believe in a higher power? Did you believe
I
in signs even?
I did. Back then I did. But that was I had, I was raised Catholic and I believed in angels, but I had left organized religion by then. I was sort of spiritual, not religious. I was studying Taoism and different world religions and the commonalities so many of them share about the light within and that, our need for love, for compassion for one another, to live in service, like those commonalities and really connecting to the light within. That was sort of my belief. And Dora was Jewish, so I learned a lot from her. But it really was a great comfort to me to sort of confirm that she was still with me, and there wasn't any of that sort of guilt that some of the organized religions kind of have around do you get to heaven and all of that. I knew she was free and she could be with me. And that really helped me on my spiritual journey of figuring out, like, what do I believe?
Hmm. Well, that was another question I was going to ask you is how did the experience change your concept of death and dying and grief?
Great question, because my expertise as a therapist, a lot of it is centers around grief. I did my master's thesis on that. And so I also did a lot of end of life care and I helped to care for my father. He died when I was pretty young in my early 20s. So I had a sense, um, there's a deeply spiritual connection with grief to the people that you lose and, navigating how do I go on? And so I had an awareness of kind of what I believed, but that really deepened it. It confirmed to me that yes, because at the end of life, there's the veil is often thin. Often there's people waiting to welcome you from the other side, and I could sort of sense things, but my mind was always like, "Oh, am I making that up?" But this was really the
Mhm.
deepening for me to really know. I mean, that was just too extraordinary. I mean, who has hundreds of ladybugs land on them the day that, and that's a childhood rhyme that until I met Dora, I'd never even heard again since childhood.
Right.
Ladybug, ladybug, fly away home. Yeah.
Yeah. How about for people who maybe are asking for a sign or looking for a sign, maybe
Mhm.
they feel like they haven't received one? Do you feel like there was anything special that you did that helped that happen for you?
Um, well, I mean, this is something I help people with now that you know, we're raised with a lot of rules about what's possible and what is true. And so sometimes our
Mhm.
mind can sort of want to argue against something that's being presented to us, but that's normal and natural. And what I would say is like, you can never ask too much. Like asking for a sign over and over and over again doesn't bother the divine. They're happy to say,
Mhm.
yes, beloved, we are here and you are not alone. And we'll send you 100 million signs if that's what you need. But it's sometimes difficult for us to trust. And so I think you can feel it in your heart. There's a spiritual idea that the soul knows the truth. And sometimes you
Mhm.
just feel an inner knowing and there's a sense of peace. I can sort of feel my nervous system relax and sort of soften. And there's just an inner knowing. And so even if your mind doubts, you can still also have an inner knowing that your mind fights a little. But the more you're open, the more you're willing. I mean, you can throw the gauntlet down and say, prove it. I mean, I've had some pretty startling experiences of the divine sort of showing up for me and saying, okay, here we are. Let us help.
Mhm.
But I think fear can get in the way. So, there's a great line from the Course of Miracles about a little bit of willingness. Can I be willing to see a sign? Maybe I'm not really, but could I be willing to become willing? Because if you want to, you can absolutely get messages and synchronicities, and you can ask, can I have it in a way that I really will believe it?
Yeah. I
You know?
have found that it does seem like there's an element of surrender that's necessary to receive a sign. And it does seem to me from the stories I've received from various people that surrender sometimes happens at a darker point, a lower point in our life.
Mhm.
It's almost like we get to a point where it feels like our only option is to surrender.
Yeah.
And
There's a
then
little
that's when the
element of
sign comes.
desperation. I think you're so
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And well, when we've tried everything else, because I think it's part of the human experience to try and fix things and solve things, do it on our own, especially in the America, our country is very much, being independent. We've got to
Hmm.
try those things first, and then we'll finally say, "Oh, all right,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
clearly not working. If there's some help, please let me know."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a good time to pivot into another one of your incredible stories where you were at a bookstore. And I think this
Oh,
was
yes.
probably a really dark point in your life, but things changed.
Yeah. So, um, I was going through what some people call a dark night of the soul when everything in your life experience, either there's a loss or some kind of upheaval, and that which is comfortable and familiar to you starts to crumble. And that was
Hmm.
what was happening to me. I had used to have a very sort of affluent, comfortable life, and I had my own business and a nice relationship. And through a series of events, it seemed like all of that was just disappearing. And I had, for a long time, had this sort of sense. I used to really be into the whole you create your own reality idea. And I had a false idea that you can really protect yourself from suffering and just have this easy peasy life. So I wasn't ready to let go of that yet. I was still determined that I was going to get my life back. But I was sort of desperate, as we just talked about. And I went to a bookstore back when we had bookstores. And I was like looking for something to like give me answers, solve this problem. There's got to be some 5-step solution that I can use to manifest. And I was walking down this aisle of a bookstore, and a book literally fell off the shelf and hit me in the head. And I was like, okay, that's another sign. There's something about this. Because it wasn't teetering off the shelf. Like it literally jumped out. So I picked it up, and it was an old book. And it was called The Story of Finhorn Garden. And I had never heard of Finhorn, which is now a spiritual community. But in the 60s, it was started by, I spent the whole night reading this book. I just came home and just couldn't put it down. And so it was a story about a couple named Eileen and Peter Caddy and their friend Dorothy McLean. And they used to work at a hotel managing it. And they had sort of used spiritual principles of abundance and positive thinking to run this hotel. And they had done very, very well. And so they were promoted to another hotel, and they sort of lost their mojo and it didn't work. And so they weren't creating the success they had this other hotel, and they got fired very suddenly. It was a shock to them. And so at the time, the Caddies had 3 small boys, and they started looking for other types of employment, but nothing was happening. And they got a little panicked, and they moved into this little caravan where 3 adults and 3 boys lived together. And they sort of parked it on the northeast area of Scotland, which is kind of rough and cold and barren. And they were very connected to listening to what they called the still small voice within. And they had their own sort of spiritual beliefs around that. So every morning they would meditate and ask for divine guidance. And they started to get messages and inspiration about how to grow food organically, planting things in the garden to support themselves because they didn't have any income. And of course, in the beginning, they were sort of questioning, but they followed the directions that they received. And they started to grow these magnificent gardens, like 40-pound cabbages and incredible things that technically weren't able to grow in that zone. So like the Royal Botanical Society was coming out to be like, say, how can this be? They were studying the soil. Like you can't go, it's not hospitable. But they were pouring love into everything they were doing, inviting this divine guidance in and wisdom and following the question. They were asking for help and they were getting this guidance. And so people started to come and hear about this, and it drew people together, and it grew into a spiritual community and an eco center. But they had sort of 3 guiding principles. And one was this respect for inner listening. The second was co-creation with nature, really living in alignment with nature and the wisdom of nature and the cycles of life. And this idea that all work can be love in action. So no matter what you're doing, cleaning toilets, working in the garden, or, something that might seem more respectable or more, valued, it's all the same. And so that really resonated to me because I was doing at this point, I had lost the business and I was doing what I felt demeaning work. And I was not feeling like it was love in action at all. I was very resentful, miserable. I was still determined to get myself out of this mess. This feeling very sorry for myself. Like, how could this happen to me? This just doesn't happen to me. So I decided, I was inspired by this Finhorn garden story, and I had a really beautiful garden. And so I decided to go out the next morning and work with my rose bush. And I just got so fed up. I was hot, and I was just sort of lying under my rose bush, kind of looking up at the sun, the clouds, saying, please help me. And I heard this voice that I thought was my neighbor say, Amy, you're getting what you want. And I was like, what? I did not ask for this. I don't want this. No, 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 no. Arguing with the divine is often what we do in a dark night of the soul. And I thought it was my neighbor because she was always like peering over the fence. So as I heard my name, Amy, I looked around. She wasn't there. No one across the street. So I just was like, oh, it's hot. It's Florida. I'm making this up. Probably been out in the sun too long. And so I just sort of closed my eyes and I started to get all of this guidance. It was like this voice was speaking to me. And it said that she was from the energy of the rose. And there are things called devas. They're like the guardian angels of every flower and plant. They feed and create life. And what she was saying was, or I perceived it as a feminine kind of energy of rose. What she said is, you plant a seed in the dark, in the earth, because that's what activates its inherent capacity to reach for the light. And reaching for the light is how all things grow. And so every seed has this innate capacity to grow. It's been programmed. And we have seeds that are planted in our soul that at some point want to crack out of their shell and come to life and allow us to bloom. So we have our own sort of divine blueprint. Every seed has a divine blueprint. Our soul has a divine blueprint. And sometimes we need these dark moments to create the environment for this seed to be planted and grow. And
Mhm.
that felt very profound to me. I had never realized or considered that darkness could be a good thing. Like these horrible, crappy moments actually could be serving something. And, if you
Mhm.
think about what makes the best fertilizer, it's crap, right? It's like,
Literally. Yeah. Yeah.
and, you know, what had to break open in me were I was hanging on to a lot of things that I was allowing to define myself, but were kind of keeping me stuck. I had financial resources. I could sort of keep myself in a little ivory tower.
Yeah.
Which is something that I wanted to do because I had already suffered a lot in my childhood. And, I kind of figured out a way to be happy and have this good life. And then it seemed like it was being taken from me. But what I realized is that, our soul comes to do certain things. So, if we are not creating an environment for that, sometimes things will happen that enable this to come to pass. And so I had to let go of a lot. And if you think of the metaphor of, the chrysalis kind of dissolving and
Mhm.
then becoming the butterfly, that's really how I learned to look at life. And that message guided me through a lot of other things that happened in my dark night of the soul because it was not an easy
Mhm.
journey. Things actually got worse from that day in the garden. But I began to feel this presence, that would communicate with me.
It, that story really speaks to me. To me, it is a profound wisdom,
Hmm.
and it's so meaningful, especially to me now. Kind of, as you know, having gone through my own dark night of the soul, almost
Hmm.
bringing me to tears. Just to think about, I think when you're in one, that is one of the number one questions that you experience is why? Why is this happening? Why is
Yeah.
this necessary? Is there even a reason or a purpose for it? So for
Yeah.
you to have been able to find something that is a beautiful, meaningful purpose in it, um, that is an extraordinary example, I think, of receiving guidance.
Yeah. And I've really come to respect that even in the most difficult moments,
Mhm.
there's a treasure, there's a gem.
Right.
I love the analogy of a pearl, how a pearl gets formed. It starts out as an irritant or a gritty substance that's intrusive to the oyster. So it
Mhm.
starts to secrete this sort of protective shell,
Mhm.
this glossy layer upon layer that creates this beautiful pearl. So this pearl emerges from something painful. And, I think that's true with us. And what I had to learn, I had so much judgment about this dark night of the soul. Like it was bad enough that I was suffering, but it was my doubts, my anger, why me? And then sort of the judgments of what did I do to deserve this or what's wrong with
Mhm.
me? And I really had to open to the loving presence outside of us. And I think inside of us, that loving, what I think is our true self, our true essence, that light within, because that gave me the ability to be more loving and kind to these
Yeah.
parts of me that were sort of raw and ragged. And like, I think of that as sort of the protective coating of love that we have to sort of spread over our painful moments. And for a lot of us, that's the exact opposite of what we do. We beat ourselves up and then we kind of feel even worse. Right. And so
Right.
I used circumstances that seemed outside of me to help me kind of connect to that world inside of me.
Yeah.
And it took a while, though. It's not an easy process, but I just kept having more and more sort of synchronistic events, which, I look at synchronicities as messages from the divine. And I remember I was really struggling financially. I still had these crappy jobs I didn't like. And I was determined to keep going. And but I was living really on the edge. So I just scraped by. Half the time I never knew where it was going to come from. And so I saw this job that I wanted to apply for because it had a lot more money. I would get paid a lot better. But the trick was I was going to have to take time off my present job to go interview. And I was really worried about losing that income. Like that's how desperate I was. I would lose $40 of my income, paid by the hour, to do this. And so I really struggled with it, but I just felt like I should do it. So I did. I took time off and I went to this job interview and I realized, oh, I don't really want this job. And I was kind of frustrated because I had all these great expectations. And even though it was more money, I just felt like it wasn't going to be fulfilling. And I was tired of doing things I didn't like. So I was sort of feeling sorry for myself again. And I lived in New England at the time. And it was a cold winter day. And I left the interview and it was starting to snow. And of course, I didn't have money to fix my broken heater in my car. So I was crying like, oh, life is so hard.
Mm.
And just sort of like, why did I take that time off? And why did I even bother, things you say. And so not feeling like any kind of light in the dark. I was very, very sad. And I heard this voice say, pull over to the car wash. I knew there was a car wash coming up. And I was thinking, I am not pulling over at the car wash. First of all, it's snowing. Why would I flipping wash my car? And I don't spend money on getting my car washed. This was a really hard time in my life. This was like about 20 years ago. But anyway, something propelled me to like pull over to this stupid car wash. And I was sort of like, now what? Right. So I heard the voice say, okay, move over there. I moved there, and it said, now open the door. And the whole time I was like, oh. I opened the door and I looked down and there was $40 on the ground right there in the middle of this parking lot that was starting to get covered in snow. And that was exactly the amount of money that I was sacrificing, or I thought I was sacrificing. And I just started to sob because I felt so loved in that moment. Such a tiny amount of money for most of us today. But to me, it was such a symbol of like every need is being met. We love you. We're with you. And something's guiding me. Something it was never a thought I would have had to pull off the road and go sit in a car wash parking lot. Like, why
Yeah.
would that be helpful? Right.
Yeah.
But it was such a gift. And I've never forgotten that because it really was the beginning of a series of stories and events for me of just always the divine showing up in the most strange, remarkable, beautiful ways that were kind of hard to believe, where I was taken care of and loved and just felt like I wasn't alone. Because sometimes in the dark night, even if you're surrounded by a family or you're, in a crowded room, you can just feel so alone, like
Right.
disconnected and longing for something that I think only can be filled in the world inside of you from this
Mm.
spiritual connection. But I only learned that from having to do it over and over and over again in practice. But
Right.
so that's another example of where I just discovered that love is there and
Yeah.
so is support. And nobody handed me a diamond ring or $1 million, so you could have parts of you that say, well, why didn't you get her out of that situation? But I had to learn some really painful things. And some of it was about to figure out who I was despite these sort of low paying, somewhat demeaning jobs, that I wasn't valued. And I had to like know my value when the outside world wasn't giving it to me. And that's a really hard one because especially
Mhm.
this being productive. And I was someone who usually bosses loved and promoted, like in my other life, I had been what I thought was kind of successful. So it felt deeply
Mhm.
humiliating to me that somehow I couldn't manifest that anymore. But on a deep, deep, deep level, I was so externally oriented. I was so needing love and affirmation from accolades and the world outside of me. I didn't know how to kind of give that to myself or even feel who I really was on the inside. So these experiences, I think, also help us kind of realize who you really are, like your true self, your true essence.
Right. Because I think that might be a question that, well, I've had, and I think a lot of people have, is how do you recognize a sign? How do you know when you've received one? Because I think a lot of people might try to just write off something like finding some money or having a book fall. They might just say, oh, that's a coincidence and try to write it off.
Yeah.
But it seems like there is, when you really have received a sign, and this is my question for you, is there some sort of realization or some sort of feeling that goes with it that makes you feel so certain? Um, and some sort of special meaning behind it that makes you know that it's a sign.
Yeah. I think it goes back for me a feeling of just like an inner knowing, a little twinkle, a little glimmer. Um, Often for me, the divine uses humor, so I might sort of laugh or giggle at the message I get, and or music or beauty. Um, I think there's so many different ways that the divine will communicate with us. Like, and if one doesn't work, they'll try another. So you don't get one shot. Like they'll keep giving them to you. And some of us are very stubborn. We have these like concrete hard hats that say, "Oh no," and it doesn't matter how long you resist, they'll keep sending you signs. Um, but I think there's a moment of relief. There's a moment of wisdom, like, oh wait, you think about something differently. I think there's just different ways that people can get signs. Like some people just have a knowing, some people hear a voice, some people see something. Sometimes it's a synchronicity. Um, but there's a sense of relief, I think, or curiosity. Even if parts of you doubt, there's another part of you that's like, well, maybe it is. So it gives you a little hope, gives you a little openness. I feel it. Sometimes I'll have like tears of joy that like, oh, I'm loved and there's a presence here. Yeah.
With your story about Finhorn and the
Mhm.
rose bush, that was, you literally heard a voice. Was that a little bit frightening to you at first?
Yes.
Um,
Oh my
and
gosh, yes.
how, because I personally have never experienced actually hearing a voice, although I've heard many stories.
Uh-huh.
And I guess I can understand the reason why is probably because it would scare me a lot.
Well, yeah. I
So,
mean, there's a fear of like, oh gosh, am I hearing voices? Um, is that part of some kind of schizophrenia or something like that? Or just like doubting yourself. And so
right.
um, I have learned because I've learned to sort of discern because, you know, all of us have parts that sort of talk to us in our head. And,
Hmm.
so I might have a part of me that's sort of chattering away that isn't really divine guidance. And so I've noticed that's kind of in my head, but I don't always hear auditory things. Sometimes I just have visions or sometimes I just know. It's a kinesthetic. I know what I know and I can't explain it. That happens a lot with
Right.
clients. I'll know there was something connected to somebody's aunt or child and they'll say, "How did you know that?" And I'll just
Mm.
know. But yeah, there's a sense when I'm discerning a voice. The way I would describe it is I can feel the voice in me versus like something outside of me. I don't know
Okay.
how else to describe it, but I can tell when there's a part of me sort of worrying about something or chattering. That sounds like it's in my ear or my head, but when it's an inner voice, it's almost like it's something speaking from me, like in my sort of solar plexus to my stomach.
Might find yourself questioning, even when you
Yes,
hear the voice, you
absolutely.
might still find parts that'll want to question it or don't want to follow what it says or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of the human experience, really. We just there's parts of us will say, "Well, who am I to get divine guidance?" Or sometimes you hear things you don't want to hear. Like I did not want to
Right.
hear Amy, you're getting what you want. At the time, I did not see that I was getting something that my soul really, really wanted me to get, which is to really learn who I was on the inside, discover this
Hmm.
eternal connection. Those were things that I quite honestly would have argued, I'm not asking for that. Give me my life back. I want to bake chocolate chip cookies and have a nice house. And like I wasn't
Right.
really interested in the depths of the spiritual path that I was being called on. So I think sometimes we get scared. And I mean, I don't want to elevate myself to like famous spiritual figures, but that's kind of a universal process of you get the call and you're like, I'm not equipped for that. I don't know how to do that. Who me? What? I don't want to do this. So
Mhm.
there's that if you're being called in a sort of direction for your life. But a lot of times, signs and synchronicities are just gifts from people who have passed on, or, you know, the voice of love wanting to reassure you that you're not alone. You're going to get through this. Help is here. There is a better way, and those
Right.
are the things we need to hear. Um,
Right.
when it's something so extraordinary and special, beyond like a good friend sitting down and telling you those things, really helps you realize, wait a minute, there's something bigger than this moment that I
Right.
am part of that's calling me along, and there's a flow to life that's a mystery and magical.
Yeah. Do you
And
feel do you feel like you are more connected to your inner guidance now more than ever? Um, or do you feel like you still have times in life where you lose it?
oh gosh, yes.
Yeah.
And the people who say, I mean, most of my mentors would agree with me. Like all of us have moments where we're going to doubt, but I'm much, 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 much more likely to listen, especially when I feel a sense of peace about something. I don't
Mhm.
usually doubt that. Um,
Yeah.
but sometimes, um, you can have a part of you that sort of says, am I making things up, or am I just reaching too far, trying to make a coincidence that isn't here? And I just think that's part of um, the dance of life.
Do you feel like there are specific tools or practices if people are interested in trying to develop more of an ability to receive signs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I think it would be the sort of same set of tools I would say, um, when you're distressed for any reason, that I would like maybe help clients with. And,
Mhm.
I do traditional, my expertise is in really integrating psychology and spirituality to help people heal so that they can really find their true essence and use their light for good in the world. Like that's really my truest, um, what brings me the greatest joy. But in that process, there are certain things that we do to help, what we would call self-soothing in therapy. And that would be like getting close to nature, getting rooted, because the entire flow of nature, like that's the natural rhythm of life. And we are part of nature. We live outside of it so much, but we're subject to that. So being in the connection to nature, looking for beauty. Your true essence is naturally beautiful. You resonate with beauty, whatever's beautiful to your eye. Slowing our breathing down, the spirit is in our breath, our essence is in our breathing.
Mm.
When we slow our breathing down, we sort of access the parasympathetic nervous system, because any amount of peace and stillness, like connecting to the still small voice, requires a sort of slowing down, and it's sort of a gentle practice. And we live in such a stressful, busy, aggressive world. Like that's not something
Mhm.
we're encouraged to do. So I would say all of those things. And, sometimes we have to ask and then be willing to be open. And if we're not really and we're skeptical, even just saying, okay, I'm willing to be open. I'm willing to be open. You
Yeah.
know? Yeah. One of my
Yeah.
friends always says, surprise and delight me.
Right.
That's her prayer. And yeah.
Yeah.
So I think like wherever you're stuck, the divine knows that. They know how to, like, I always say they, because to me it's more than, it's just a sort of universal presence, but it's greater than sort of what we assign what God is or what the divine is. But yeah, I think wherever you're stuck, the divine knows that and can
Mm.
figure out a way to meet you there. Like you're never going to be left without this loving presence. And the more we practice it and open up to it, the more, in my experience, we begin to feel it,
Right.
and in my experience, there's no one right religion or way to do it. Right. And so,
Right.
I had a client who um, did not believe in any sort of spiritual beliefs in any way. Um, but he had a really, really, really strong intuition. And
Mm.
he used it constantly to make every business decision that he ever did. And he did huge things in the world. And he he could somehow sort of look at that intuition and as like an innate part of him,
Mhm.
but he really trusted it, even though he didn't believe a thing about any kind of idea about God. And that was always interesting to me. But to me, I just went with it because who cares what you call it? Like if it brings you joy, if it guides you to safety, if it gives you clarity, if it gives you hope, if it connects you to the world, if it helps you do something that benefits humanity, I don't care what we call it, right? It's like, if I can
I
help you
have
connect with that, that's great.
I've really experienced that firsthand in receiving so many stories from so many people. Is
Yeah.
I almost From my experience, it almost starts to feel like the words are just kind of interchangeable, really. Whether I call it an angel sign or, like you said, intuition,
Yeah.
God, higher power, an internal voice. Um, it seems like the word doesn't it seems like it's mattering less and less as I receive more and more stories because it's sort of like I just start to focus on the fact that it seems like there is some sort of higher power that's available to everyone. And our work is just figuring out how to hear it more of the time.
Yeah. That's why I love what you're doing, Jen. And I was so glad to be able to contribute because I think what you're doing is it's like food, spiritual food. We don't even have to call it spiritual food. Just the world is starving for this, you know?
Right.
And it's such an incredible project. I know you're going to touch so many people's lives, people who, because storytelling is such a way to speak to the soul and the universal human experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd rather hear a good story than someone standing on stage lecturing me on how to do something. My parts of me
Yes.
are sort of defiant and tired of all that. Yeah, but I just love
Yes.
hearing somebody like my friend, just where we started with my friend Dora. I loved her stories of life. Like she had lived 98 years. She born in 1902, and I just was mesmerized hearing little things about life on the farm or school or just how she navigated. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I have a little embroidered thing that I got at a garage sale years ago that I loved, and it's sort of a symbol of all the different world religions. They're all, and it
Okay.
says all spiritual paths meet in the middle. And I always think that's like such a beautiful way of summing it up, you know?
Yeah, I love that. And that
Yeah,
was a part of my dream with this project too, was to find people from various different religions and spiritual
yeah,
paths and find the commonalities in their experiences, and which I certainly have
yeah.
already seen. So,
Yeah, and what a unifying thing because there's so much conflict about religion and whose God is right and who whatever. And to me, it's about love. Like love doesn't
love,
sit and
yes.
argue, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Love, acceptance, connection, understanding,
Yeah.
finding commonality, finding common ground. Yes.
And I would
100%.
say those words that you just used are exactly how you kind of know it's a sign or can
Oh,
trust.
yeah.
You experience one or all of those things. Yeah.
Yes. I love that you said that because when I started receiving signs from my grandfather, I felt closer to him through those signs than I ever did during the time when he was alive. I feel
Isn't
closer
that
to him now through the signs.
yeah, I feel that way with
Yeah.
my father. I am very, very close to him. I feel his presence all the time. And yeah, and he says funny things that only he would say, like kind of the way he would have said them if he was alive. And yeah, it's such a gift because he died young. And that's a just to connect with the people that we love and know that there's a way is to me such a beautiful healing thing in grief.
Right.
that love never dies. The form
Yeah.
it takes is different. Yeah, but there's this connection. And I've just had enough experiences and I've helped enough people at the end of life that I don't need to hit anybody over the head with it. If they don't believe me, that's fine. I don't go out and, say this is the absolute truth, but I am just certain beyond any shadow of a doubt that we are eternal beings and that love is what remains through all the boundaries of time and space. And we can
Yeah.
always connect. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I think that's a beautiful way to end.
Yeah.
Unless you feel like you have anything else you'd like to add in terms of messages you'd like people to take away from your stories.
Gosh, no. I mean, I feel very complete, and this was a gift to be
Yeah.
able to connect in this way. And I can't wait to listen to your other stories and guests. This will be fun. And thank you. This was a really delightful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being here.
Oh,
I find all of your stories really inspirational and beautiful. I think they'll really help a lot of people. So thank you so much for sharing so openly.
yeah. My
Did you want
pleasure.
to share anything about how people might connect with you if they'd like to?
Oh, sure. You could contact me through my website, Delight the World. I have a very small YouTube channel. Everything's Delight the World, but there's a
Yeah.
contact they can reach out. Because a
And I
lot
can
of
include the links too.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Because a lot of what I do in my work, I offer something called spiritual mentoring. It's a lot of what we've talked about today, really connecting with your true essence and learning to bring love and kindness to the parts of you that have been hurt and carry pain and kind of find your true way of expressing yourself in this world, who you are, who you want to be. And, everyone has a way, a unique expression of their own light that, is a gift. And that's what I really love helping people discover and what's maybe stopping them. So, yeah, Delight the World's the best way to connect.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you, Jen. Take care.